Good morning and welcome to our stakeholder event for the publication of our Annual Review 2023. I'm Huma Yusuf and I'm Director of Business Integrity here at British International Investment. I'll be your host for today's event. Our goal today is to provide you with an overview of the work we've been doing over the last year and offer you the chance to ask our CEO and Chair some questions. Having worked at BII for 6 years, including directly supporting our investees to build better businesses, I'm especially pleased to be hosting today's event. And that's because the theme for this annual review is Creating Impact Together. This theme goes to the heart of how British International Investment makes a difference. We invest to reduce poverty, to promote equality, and to combat the climate crisis. But we know we cannot achieve this impact alone. We work in partnership with many others, with investment partners, with entrepreneurs, and with the countries where we invest. And throughout today's event, you'll hear about how partnerships are enabling us to have a positive impact, both on people's lives and on the planet. So let's take a look at today's agenda. First up, we have our chair, Diana Layfield, who will provide her perspective on 2023, the progress made by BII and by our partners, and our ambitions for the future. Diana will then hand over to our CEO, Nick O'Donoghue, who will provide a more detailed overview of our work in 2023. As you may know, this will be Nick's last annual review, as he will be standing down later this year. So we're really looking forward to hearing some of his reflections on how BII has evolved since he joined in 2017. We'll then go on to host 2 panel sessions, which will look at 2 key areas of impact: our impact on people's lives and our impact on the planet. We are pleased to be joined by several of our investees and other partners to explore these themes today. Our first panel will be chaired by my colleague, Colin Buckley, Managing Director and General Counsel at BII, who will host a session on impact on people, partnerships to support those most in need. He'll be joined by our partners from Invest for Impact Nepal, the Africa Resilience Investment Accelerator, and GridWorks. Working on the ground in different countries and across diverse sectors and striving to make a difference, our panelists have many interesting experiences and insights to share. For our second panel, my colleague Maria Smith, our Chief Impact Officer, will be joined by 3 more of our investee partners: Sun Culture, New Forests, and Wavemaker Impact. Together, they'll explore the theme, Impact on the Planet, Partnerships to Support Climate Innovation. They'll be talking about how far-sighted solutions and partnerships, from climate tech to carbon credits, are helping to combat the climate emergency. And then Nick and Diana will return for our No Questions Barred Q&A. As always, you can ask whatever you like, and they will, as far as they can, answer as fully as possible. So please start thinking about what you'd like to ask them and put your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. We're expecting well over 500 participants today, so we'll do our very best to get through as many of your questions as possible. I hope you agree we have a great agenda for you today. So let's get started. I'm delighted to introduce our chair, Diana Layfield.
Thank you, Huma, for that introduction. And a very warm welcome to everyone here with us in London and to all of you joining virtually for our annual review event. To reiterate what Huma has said, please do send us your questions. I'd like to begin by reflecting on the theme of this year's annual review, Creating Impact Together. No country has ever escaped poverty without developing a thriving private sector. And those living in the poorest region are also at the greatest risk from the negative effects of climate change. But building successful economies and meeting the climate challenge depends upon investment. And the people and the places most in need of capital sadly end up receiving the least. That is why BII exists today. We support the growth of sustainable economies that work for both people and the planet. Through our investment, we aim to create greater security for people, more jobs and opportunities, tax revenues for governments, and to combat the causes and effects of the climate emergency. But we can't achieve this impact alone. As the UK's long-term investor into developing economies, we work in partnership with many others, with you, with our investment partners, with entrepreneurs, and with the countries where we invest. We want our partners to achieve the success that will lead to further prosperity and help meet the huge challenge of climate change. The UK's support can pave the way for widespread investment that gives partner governments the long-term means to provide for their people and end aid dependency. I was fortunate enough to visit some of our businesses just last week in Pakistan. I met with customers at Cash Foundation, a microfinance institution that lends money to women entrepreneurs. I met a group of determined women running small businesses in their homes to create additional income for their families. They were generating a whole host of economic activity, embroidering garments, making bags, or providing beautician services. They were able to do that as a result of the loans they received from Cash. We're immensely proud to support the company's impressive efforts to promote female entrepreneurship. I heard extraordinary stories from each of the women of how they transformed their own lives and that of their families. One was supporting a disabled child and elderly parent. Many had husbands who were day-wage workers with unreliable incomes, and these women had managed to become the family breadwinner. Most had no alternative support or funding route which would support their aspiration to start or grow a small business. But what was hugely compelling for me was the fact that all of them were choosing to prioritise their children's education, including their daughters. I also had the chance to visit Zephyr Power, a renewable energy company in the country that has developed a 50-megawatt wind power plant. Not only is the company generating clean, green power to help address energy poverty and the climate emergency, but it is also addressing the nature crisis. The company is restoring and nurturing mangrove forests to guard against tidal erosion. Seeing the transformation in the landscape from the desolate, which is the default pattern in the area and common across the other concessions, to one where the mangroves help to recreate an entire thriving ecosystem with crabs, lungfish, and other activity we saw. Activity which over time is increasing the fish yield in the area while making the entire system more sustainable. This was truly impressive. And to do this in the context of a core business generating renewable power for the next generation was a great example of our climate work in action. These are just two examples from our portfolio. Examples of how our investment is based on respectful partnership. Examples of how we're backing companies to achieve for their own communities and their families. That is what British International Investment does best. It provides investment that matters to developing countries. We back them to achieve. In that respect, 2023 was a year of progress. Against a very challenging global backdrop, I was pleased we were able to continue to commit a significant amount of capital to new businesses, over £1.3 billion. Today, we have investment relationships with nearly 1,500 businesses across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. We continue to focus our capital and support on the people and places that need it the most. Whether that's finding ways to bring capital to the most fragile and vulnerable markets, or ensuring our finance reaches people on the lowest of incomes. By investing so that they can access basic goods and services like electricity and access to finance. So they can improve their livelihoods through employment and sell their products at a fair price. We are already the UK government's largest provider of climate finance to emerging markets. But we want to go even further on climate finance. In particular, we want to mobilise significantly more private capital into the emerging economies where we invest. So while we've been making progress on all fronts, we know that there is much, much more to do. As we speak, there is the state opening of Parliament here in the UK following the recent general election. We now have a new Labour government, and I know that that government believes profoundly in development, in tackling poverty in its roots, in supporting economic growth, climate action, and in promoting equality for women and girls. We're very much looking forward to working with David Lammy and Annalise Dodds to advance this shared agenda. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank Andrew Mitchell, the departing Minister for Development, for his work and contributions to development and BII over many years. Throughout its 75-year history, BII is an institution that has demonstrated an unwavering consistency of purpose. Like the new government, we believe in delivering a sustainable development agenda based on genuine respect and partnership, with the goal of ensuring our long-term investment helps countries build fairer, safer, and more prosperous futures for their people. I'd like to end with thanks. First, to our civil service partners at FCDO. Thank you for everything that you do in supporting our mandate. Thanks also to you, our audience, for your continued support, interest, and challenge. I know that scrutinising our performance is a crucial part of the accountability mechanism, but most importantly, it helps guide us to better solutions. And of course, I want to profoundly thank every member of staff at BII for their continuing dedication and hard work. Soon, during this year, we will be saying goodbye and good luck to Nick O'Donoghue, our CEO. I'd therefore like to end by expressing my and the board's huge gratitude to Nick. Over the last 2 years, I've had the privilege to work with him on a wide range of areas, and he has always shown his characteristic thoughtfulness, as well as a deep and enduring passion for development, and a profound commitment to BII as an institution. Nick has led a transformation of BII over the last 7 years. He's transformed the scale at which we invest and change lives. The institution has invested over £9 billion in that period, while assets have grown from 5 billion to 8.5 billion. He's channeled a world-class team to include climate finance at scale to help the world's most affected. Critically, he has transformed our focus on impact and made the assessment of this scientific and rigorous. I know his legacy will be an enduring one. Thank you, Nick. Before I pass over to Nick for one final time, we have a short film which provides you an overview of the last year.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Diana. Thank you for those very kind words. As Diana mentioned, this is my 8th and final presentation of BII's annual review, so I want to begin by saying that it's been just such a huge privilege to lead this organization for the last 7.5 years. BII, CDC before it, is a really special organization with a fantastic history and extraordinary people. Now, when I arrived in 2017, I started by sharing 2 main goals with our board and our shareholder. The first one was to ensure that we really did put development impact at the core of everything we do. And the second was to build a world-class investment institution that would really position the UK at the forefront of development finance. And although we'd be the first to say that no institution is perfect, I think we've gone a long way towards delivering on both those objectives. As I've said many times before, development finance institution can't do everything, and we're not a panacea for every global development problem. We've always really been just one part of an excellent, much broader UK program. But I've always felt that if we have the right people, if we have the right processes, if we have the right partnerships, that there's much we can do to address the day-to-day challenges that affect so many people. Today, for example, 650 million people in Africa still don't have access to reliable power. 800 million people don't have internet and mobile access. 400 million people don't even have clean drinking water. So we at BII can build infrastructure that can help change that. At current population growth rates, Africa needs 10 million new jobs every year to employ its young people. We can provide capital that will help companies build new factories, that can grow new markets, and that can help create those desperately needed jobs. In many of the countries where we invest, women are effectively frozen out of the economy. They lack access to any form of credit. That limits their ability to grow businesses, to support their families, despite their ambitions. And we can use our funding to incentivize lenders to dedicate more to women-owned and operated businesses. Today in developing economies, small-scale farmers are battling the changing climate and the extreme weather events it creates. They can't even access or afford modern fertilizers or find buyers for their products, so their yields and income are too low to even support their families. And we can support at every step, whether that's helping them get the products to increase their yields or constructing processing facilities to help them create more value from their crops. And these are just some of the ways that development finance can change lives. However, of course, what we do is only worthwhile if it's making a palpable difference to people's lives and livelihoods. And in my position as the chief executive of this organization, I'm really lucky because I get to see firsthand the difference we're making. Most recently, I was in, for example, Tanzania. There we're supporting new forestry projects, new wind turbines, small-scale hydro projects, rural high-speed internet, mobile access, new credit facilities for women. And all of those investments we've made in the last year, and all of them in a country where private capital outside of development institutions is almost impossible to find. So what we provide is the investment that many countries' leaders are crying out for. And what I saw in Tanzania is reflective of what I see BII doing time and time again in so many different countries. So I'm really proud that we've come such a long way over the last 7 years, but I wanted now to talk a little bit more specifically about 2023. And I don't need to tell you that it's been another difficult year, both from a macroeconomic and a political perspective. The economic and humanitarian impact of events like COVID, the Ukraine war, the dislocation that all of that brought to food and energy prices, these things play out over multiple years. And we saw that all too clearly in 2023. In particular for us, the impact of large-scale currency devaluations in Nigeria, in Egypt, in Pakistan, to name but a few. This makes life difficult for our investees and makes sustainable investment very challenging. So against this backdrop and with this context, I feel it's pretty positive about what we've achieved. Our investment pace has remained broadly similar to 2022, with £1.3 billion of gross commitments, despite these headwinds. As I've said before, it's critically important that we earn a return on those investments. In that respect, 2023 was also a positive year. Our gross return across the portfolio was just over 5% in dollars. The appreciation of sterling in 2023 meant a more modest portfolio return in sterling of about 1.1%. But of course, it's important to view our financial return longer term, and our 7-year average annual portfolio return in sterling terms remains above 5%. The effectiveness, however, of a DFI should not be judged just by their own investments, but also by the role they're playing in mobilizing others, especially more commercial investors. That's a key objective at BII, and I was pleased last year to see us mobilize nearly $1 billion. So those numbers are all positive, but of course we're here really today to look at our impact both on people and on the planet. And indeed, one of the things that has changed most dramatically in my time at BII is our role in supporting UK climate finance investment and that transition to net zero in Africa and Asia. Importantly, every investment we make is screened for Paris alignment. In addition, last year, nearly 40% of our commitments met the official definition of climate finance, that is, projects specifically designed to mitigate or adapt to the effects of climate change. Last year, we made almost £450 million of new climate finance investments. Consequently, we're on track to deliver over £2 billion of climate finance during this strategy period. And that covers a real breadth of sectors and technology solutions, many of which are in the most challenging environments. This year, for example, that includes Planet Solar, Sierra Leone's first large-scale solar independent power producer, which is helping to address the country's desperate need for clean and affordable power. And SunCulture, a Kenya-based company that provides solar-powered irrigation systems to smallholder farmers, and we're going to hear from that company later this morning. And Battery Smart, which is building India's largest network of battery swapping stations for 2- and 3-wheeler electric vehicles. And when I visited the company last year in India, I got to see firsthand how our investment will help to increase the use of electric 3-wheelers, allows drivers to earn more, allows air quality to improve. Now, in conversations on climate change at COP or the World Bank or the London Climate Week, one of the things that you hear most often is that building more renewable power solves only half our problem. We need to bring massive private sector investment into grid transmission. And we'll not be able to use the new, if we don't, we're not going to be able to use the new renewable sources we're developing. So that's precisely why we set up GridWorks in 2019. We were willing to invest equity, start new greenfield projects, make a real difference in places like Burundi, one of the poorest countries in the world. And there, GridWorks is building a new company that's going to provide green energy to 70% of the population in a country where today only 12% have access. It's also leading multiple discussions with African governments on how to improve transmission and increase energy access. And we're going to hear more from GridWorks later this morning. Southeast Asia is another area which is facing growing energy demand. Economies there have almost doubled in size since 2000. It's also heavily reliant on fossil fuels, especially coal. And it's really no exaggeration to say that unless we can support Asia's transition to a greener economy, decouple its growth from its carbon emissions, we'll never be able to move the needle on climate change. So that's why our shareholder asked us to expand our climate finance activities to Southeast Asia. And I was very pleased that BII made its first investments in the region last year. And those investments range from financing clean energy solutions to transforming recycling and waste management supply chains. I personally had the opportunity last year to visit Solar Green Energy in Cambodia. That's our funding has helped build new solar irrigation that allows water to be taken from the Mekong River and provide irrigation to 500 hectares of small rice farms. So I wanted today to put particular attention on these vital climate activities, but of course it's also my view that even though helping countries transition to net zero will improve lives, it's important it doesn't distract us from making progress against all the other SDGs. And as Diana said, private sector growth is essential if we're going to eradicate poverty and achieve the SDGs. And it's going to be necessary to generate more affordable and accessible jobs and services, create more jobs and opportunities. Provide a tax base for governments to invest in social infrastructure and public goods. And I just returned last week from Pakistan. Tax collection in Pakistan is less than 10% of GDP compared with the OECD average of 34%. So there's a critical need to increase that by broadening the formal economy and the tax base. And BII's objective is to support that growth, to ensure the benefits are shared with poorer and more marginalized sections of society. And one of the ways that we can do that is by making investment available in local currency with terms that are accessible to young people, to women, to SMEs, to the smallest entrepreneurs. One thing last year that I'm particularly proud of is our launch of a new company in Ghana called Growth Investment Partners. And once again, it's an example of a new company started and entirely financed by BII, this time to provide higher risk, local currency-based loans to small companies in Ghana. And it's already attracting new investment from other DFIs as well as from local Ghanaian pension funds, and we're working to replicate that model across Africa. Another key area for us is our focus on empowering women, and I'm glad to say that in 2023, almost 25% of our annual commitments met the 2X gender lens definition. But our aim goes to further than just this target, and our aim in every country we invest in is to increase the number of women leaders, to hire and upskill more women employees, to ensure those jobs are high quality jobs, to ensure the highest standards in areas like safeguarding, to provide affordable products that meet women's needs. All the companies in our portfolio are required to have policies in place that support and promote and protect women. And I see real progress in many of the companies and many of the countries I visited, particularly in Africa. And in Africa, we're finding a rising wave of inspiring female leaders. And today, BII is proud to support the largest bank in Zambia, it's run by a woman. The largest bank in Tanzania, also run by a woman. The largest food company in East and Southern Africa, run by a woman, and to name just a few. So overall, I feel very positive about how BII performed in 2023. I hope that our annual review illustrates that, and I hope that you enjoy reading it. And finally, I also feel very positive about what we've been able to achieve over the last 7.5 years. I think we've built an institution that has achieved an enormous amount. It's recognized as a leader among all development finance groups. I think the strong institutional foundation that we've built is going to allow us to do much more, particularly in partnership with other financial institutions. We look forward to working with our new government here in the UK to go even further. And as I prepare to step down, I want to end by again thanking all those colleagues at BII and CDC before it for their support. Anything that we've achieved over the last 7.5 years is really a tribute to the talent and the commitment that we have both here in London and in all our offices across all the countries in which we invest. I want to thank Diana and our board for their wisdom, their challenge, their constant encouragement. I want to thank everybody at FCDO and the Department for International Development before it for providing us with all the resources to do our job, for giving us their expertise and opening their connections, and all the while respecting our independence as an investor. But most especially, I want to thank all our partners and investee companies. It's you who are doing the really hard work of delivering jobs and more prosperous lives in really such difficult economic and political environments. So I hope as I leave, BII can go from strength to strength, continue to play an important role for Britain in showing leadership on development and climate finance. And as I hand over the stewardship of this wonderful and vital institution, I know that my successor is going to build on this success. So thank you for listening, and I'm going to hand the mic over to Huma.
Thank you, Nick. Please can I remind you to send through your questions for Diana and Nick via the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. Next up, we're starting to delve deeper into two of the themes in our annual review. First up is the panel Impact on People, Partnerships to Support Those Most in Need. Our panelists, a group of our investment partners, will explore how development finance can play a role in more vulnerable and fragile countries. The panel will discuss common challenges and how partnerships and innovative approaches are overcoming these to make a difference to people's lives. But before I hand over to our panel host, Colin Buckley, we'll start with a short film which introduces some of our key investments from 2023. Let's take a look.
You know, when you are doing a business, you aspire to grow. And most of these other financial institutions were not there for me. But First Bank was there. With First Bank, I've been able to grow my business to a very large extent. You know, when you are expanding, you are growing, profitability too is increasing, and that gives me joy.
Together with British International Investment, the UK government is working around the world to create the conditions for SMEs to thrive. Here in Ghana, we value our partnership with BII and the expertise they bring to help us work towards that shared objective. BII is helping to create the conditions for inclusive economic growth and the creation of jobs right the way across the country, just what Ghana's economy needs.
Good morning. My name is Colin Buckley. I'm a Managing Director and General Counsel at BII, and today I'm moderating a panel entitled Impact on People, Partnerships to Support Those Most in Need. So 20 years ago, Paul Collier wrote a book called The Bottom Billion, and in it, he highlighted the fact that those countries and people most in need have been left behind by the economic growth spurt in developing economies. Today, we're going to talk to some remarkable people, partners of BII, who are focusing on those in that most difficult task, improving lives in some of the most vulnerable and fragile countries. Let me start by introducing our panel. We have Deep Karki, who is Technical Director of Invest for Impact Nepal, or IIN. Deep has over 25 years of experience spanning the financial services industry, including banking, private equity, development finance. He's worked for the IFC, he's worked for the World Bank. And at IIN, Deep supports partner financial institutions and private equity and venture capital funds, guiding them through becoming investment ready for foreign investors, including DFIs. I'm joined also by Dr. Snowy Koza, who is the non-executive director of GridWorks. Dr. Koza is a distinguished South African business executive and development activist with over 30 years of experience in management and directorship roles. She's been instrumental in leading Big in Africa, serving as its group CEO and its executive chairperson. And our third panelist today is Jules Ndambu. He is a principal at the Africa Resilience Investment Accelerator, which we'll call ARIA, and he's a managing director at Cross Boundary. Jules leads ARIA's investment strategy on financial services with a focus on improving access to finance for people in frontier markets. He leads cross-boundary investment advisory team in the Democratic Republic of Congo and is based in our Kinshasa office. So Deep, let's start with you. I mean, let's start with Invest for Impact Nepal. Tell us what it's all about, what it's trying to achieve in Nepal.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you for the introduction and for this opportunity to share our work about Invest for Impact Nepal. Before I get into the work of Invest for Impact Nepal itself, I just want to set a small little context. And the context is, when we started, where were we? And why was the need for Invest for Impact Nepal to be initiated? And Invest for Impact Nepal was initiated with the leadership of BII in partnership with FMO and SDC. The political environment in Nepal has improved in the last decade or so. There's some element of stability that the country has been able to achieve. We would have liked it to be much better, but nevertheless, foreign investment has been the most major challenge for the economy. Nepal has not been able to attract foreign investments, and the investment gap for SMEs in a recent study shows that about $3 to $4 billion of financing gap for SMEs. SME is, like many other countries like Nepal, is the engine for economic growth and the creator of jobs. And we have a report stated that about 500,000 people joining the workforce every year, and the economy is only able to cater for 20% of it. And that is why just last year, we had 550,000 work permits issued by the Department of Labor for foreign employment. So the local economy is now competing with foreign jobs, and obviously that competition is not at the same level playing field, but, the lack of jobs being created, is, such a big challenge to the economy right now. And prior to Invest for Impact Nepal, there were just three, if I may call all of them DFIs, just three DFIs, BII, FMO, and IFC investments. Very limited. And that too, limited in the real sector, just one or two examples you could have in agribusiness and the ICT, and one or two investments in the banking sector. And in order to overcome this huge 3 to 4 billion investment gap, what was identified during the design of this program is that how can we get development financial institutions to lead the way or pave the path for foreign investment into the financial service industry, which was the most viable way to get there. And most viable because the real sector does not provide adequate amount of opportunities. The sizes of these enterprises are small. They don't know much about DFI. So the challenge was to ensure that DFIs could now invest in a range of financial institutions, including private equity funds, so that capital could come in and pave the way for additional capital. So given that situation, Invest for Impact Nepal was established with a very clear goal to bridge that financing gap for SMEs.
So Deep, I mean, when you think about development investment in a country like Nepal, you wouldn't normally think about investing in a private equity fund or a financial or a bank. So can you explain a little bit about why that's so important in order to actually see the impact in the ground on the part of SMEs or small entrepreneurs?
I think there are two key issues here. One is Nepal's private sector does not generate the kind of opportunities for investment for DFIs and impact investors like other markets do. We are still internally oriented. We have very few export-oriented businesses. Foreign exchange is a big challenge, and ticket size. So the size of companies that we have in Nepal are not viable for DFI and impact investors, direct investments. It has been tried. A couple of investments have been made, but they have not sort of proliferated across the industries. So the investments through the banking sector, and because 90%, like again, like many other countries, like Nepal, 90% of our enterprises are SMEs, and they need smaller capital, and they need financing in local currency because they are not export-oriented businesses. So what financial intermediaries and private equity funds do is bridge that gap, that financing. They translate large investments down to local small investments and become the intermediary for these institutions to pass on those investments.
Okay, so I understand that. I get that sort of bridging intermediation. Can you give us some examples of some of the investments that have occurred because of IIN that wouldn't have occurred otherwise?
We're a market shaping program, and to answer that question directly, to say, what is it that you can attribute to yourself is for the evaluation team to sort of answer. But what we can tell you is, since 2021, there were just about 2 or 3 investments in the financial services industry. After IIN came into operations and started its collaborative work, we now have 20 plus DFIs engaged through the platform. We've organized 2 missions to Nepal, where most of these DFIs have participated. And in this period, the investment in the financial services industry has increased. Just in these 3 years alone, the total investment of all of these collective DFIs is 563 million. And of which 463 million is for SME financing.
Well, thanks very much, Deep. Jules, a lot of what Deep is saying must seem familiar to you, because as I understand it, ARIA is trying to duplicate this in the African context. So how does Jules' experience in Nepal resonate to you with your work in Africa with ARIA?
Yeah, the experience that has been shared by Deep resonate a lot with us in Africa. Just a quick word about ARIA, which is a fantastic and unique initiative from DFIs, born out of the observation that certain countries are underinvested. And these countries on the continent, they tend to be more marginalized for a range of reasons and are difficult for DFIs to operate and invest in. And then ARIA is really that initiative, that pooling and sharing resources from DFIs by embedding people into those fragile markets, having boots on the ground to assist with pipeline origination, deal triage, building relationship with future DFIs, investees. And of course, ARIA is present in 5 fragile African markets today, including Benin, DRC, Ethiopia, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. And again, it's an initiative led by BI in partnership with FMO. We see a lot of challenges to be overcome in these markets with regard to the quality of the deal flow that DFIs can finance. The ticket size sometimes that DFIs offer is higher than what is required by most small and medium-sized enterprises in the market. And that strategy of effectively going through intermediaries like financial institutions is definitely what resonates with us, and it's actually needed in those markets to reach out to SMEs and low-income population that are really at the bottom of the pyramid.
Jules, I mean, development institutions have been in Africa for decades. I mean, what is it about ARIA that's different this time around than what we've been doing, all of the last 50 years?
What is very different from ARIA this time around is that it's really about mutualizing resources. It's very difficult for smaller DFIs to have presence across different fragile markets. What ARIA is really solving for is ensuring that those DFI can all come together, can pull resources together, can have investment professionals embedded into these markets to really source, vet transactions before recommending it for screening and having them enter DFI's pipeline. And then the other thing that ARIA also does, which is great, is ARIA offers pre-investment technical assistance and capacity building support.
Yeah, I suppose it's early days for ARIA. I mean, ARIA's only been around a few years, but I mean, hearing you describe it, is there something that you're particularly proud of that ARIA has accomplished?
Yeah, there are a couple of examples. The first one is the support that ARIA is providing to an enterprise in Ethiopia that is essentially producing value-added food product using teff that they source from smallholder farmers, and transforming that into pasta, into snacks, into protein powders. And this company has been able to secure sales contract with buyers, in the UK. And for them to be able to access the type of capital that they need in order to scale their operations, ARIA provided them with technical assistance to basically review the legal structure and make sure that they can have a holding company registered in the UK that can actually access equity investments from some DFIs, and that would allow them actually to buy most of the capital expenditures that they need in order to grow. And then on the other side, they have a legal entity which can be financed locally in Ethiopia by some commercial banks for their working capital need. ARIA DFIs haven't yet invested, but that TA support positions them for their future growth opportunities. And then the other example is the technical assistance program that we have structured with a bank here in the DRC, which is active in the agri-food sector. But they have told us that they haven't been able to really reach out to smallholder farmers at the bottom of the pyramid. And they really want DFI's support to be able to develop some products that will be tailored to smallholder farmers acting in different value chains, such as coffee, cocoa, maize, scattered across the country in the DRC.
Thanks for sharing those examples, Jules. Dr. Koza, GridWorks is a little bit older than ARIA, but it's still relatively young. And it was set up in order to improve energy access on the African continent by investing in electricity networks. So let's start out with, why did GridWorks have to be created in the first place? What's the challenge there?
Yes, GridWorks is a young organization, 5 years old, as you said, and only exists because of the great foresight and vision of BII. Let me start with challenges, which, Colin, I would like to reframe as lessons learned. And I want to share 3 lessons. The first one is that it takes time to get things right. We are trying, remember, to introduce new ways of investing in electricity transmission and distribution. And it's natural that it will take time. So in our work, starting from building large-scale mini-grids to developing transmission and distribution projects, we are often working without existing reference points while introducing new concepts. The second lesson is that not everyone would agree with you. So we know that in Africa, there are established views about how electricity access can be achieved and how networks can be financed. So not everyone would agree with you, but we're finding more and more of African governments that are willing to look at alternative ways to fund their critical electricity infrastructure. So now governments are now handing over responsibility, some responsibility, let me say, to the private sector. But that also allows governments to be able to focus their limited budget on priorities like health and education. The third lesson that we have learned is be realistic. Grids are hard, Colin, to develop. Few, if any, organizations like GridWorks that exist that are ready and willing to do early stage development, which is needed in Africa to get our grids investable. So what are the challenges? We are seeing a lot of successes. So those challenges for us do not deter us from doing what we need to do on the continent. And we are starting to develop a series of groundbreaking projects to bring clean, affordable, and reliable power to people and business across Africa. So I want to share with you, Colin, 3 successes. The first one is that we are now entering independent transmission projects. So GridWorks is at the forefront of a new wave of independent power transmission. We call it IPTs. These projects offer African governments an alternative way of funding critical infrastructure without needing to increase government borrowing. We have announced new projects, and we are happy in Uganda, Tanzania, and Mozambique, which will increase energy access and reliability, as well as allow an uptake of more renewable energy. The second one is MOI in the DRC, Jules. And this is an ambitious program to build greenfield solar-powered utilities that will provide electricity to millions of people in isolated cities around the northern part of the DRC. The third success, Colin, is Anzana Power, which is an African utility that develops, invests, and operates distributed renewable power to projects that are encouraging to bring reliable and low cost, and I want to emphasize low cost power, to rural communities across Southern and Eastern Africa.
Thank you very much, Dr. Koza. I mean, when we think about investing in grids, it sounds awfully technical. And can you give us some sense of what it means for some of these rural communities to suddenly receive power where that power wasn't available before? I mean, how does this change people's lives?
Well, it's changing the lives of people, Colin, and the lives of those communities around where the power grid is running. So remember, as I said when we started, that we are just 5 years old. So most of our projects are currently in development. However, there is one project that excites me all the time, which is up and running, which is Zengamina Power. So Zengamina is a privately developed mini utility that supplies power to Ikelenge district in the northwest Zambia. So it generates renewable power from mini hydro electric scheme on the upper side of the Zambezi River. It then transmits the power across an independent island grid, 300 kilometers from the national grid, and directly supplies 1,000 connections, impacting 9,000 people. And this is done with the support of the Zambian government and is providing a blueprint for the government of Zambia to rapidly use this as a blueprint to increase electrification in other parts of northwest Zambia. So the impact on the community is huge. And I want to use one example, Colin. The example is that through Zengamina, there's a community in Kelenge, which has a rural hospital and a school. And this hospital is staffed with well-trained doctors and surgeons and performs life-saving procedures not seen in most rural Africa. There is one school also. The school is one of the best in Zambia, and children around the country are traveling to go to this Ikelenge school to attend it. So the school and the hospital could not function, Colin, without the power they get from Zengamina. So this is one example of a real project that Zengamina has provided. And in addition to this, there's a farm called Nchila. This farm was able to produce maize off-season due to the ability to provide reliable irrigation. This is impressive because, you know, the rural farmer has helped to reduce shortage of food because currently in Zambia there is drought, but this farmer was able to produce maize that feeds most of the communities around Zambia.
Thank you very much, Dr. Koza, for bringing home the kind of the reality of that type of impact. Deep, let me ask you a question. I mean, we're talking about fragile and vulnerable countries. I mean, are there particular challenges that you face in these countries that you don't face in kind of normal developing economies?
Many, Colin. You know, specifically, I mean, you know, remaining within the Nepalese context, investment in the real sector, or in any sector, is about size, is about the currency, it's about investment readiness, regulatory framework, and all of that. But most important, what we have learned through the IIN's work is two things. One is the demand side. On the demand side in Nepal, you don't have particularly the kind of enterprises that have been able to capture the imagination of DFIs and impact investors yet. You know, it is only the financial services sector that has become a little bit attractive in the last 3-4 years. The hydropower sector, the energy sector, is seen as one of the biggest potential, you know, but we've had only one such project developed with the consortium of DFIs and IFCs so far. And even there's a lot of other challenges around regulations and environmental and social governance, and the blanket of investment readiness.
And Jules, is there anything that you can add to that from your experience in ARIA of challenges and how you've overcome those challenges?
I think that everything that Deep has mentioned is kind of similar in the markets that we also operate in. I would like to also stress the business enabling, environment and the role normally that the government, in those markets need to play in order to put together an environment that is really conducive to businesses. And taxation is definitely, in the case of Congo, an area where you can even find multiplicity of taxes at the state level, at the provincial level, and some of them are even illegal. Let's put it that way. So it's definitely creates a challenge for businesses to operate, to grow, but also to be able to attract, capital. And on the regulatory front, still in many markets, you will find private capital market being sort of developed that would allow private equity, venture capital funds to come and establish, shops and in those countries. And because they have a local presence, they are also able to finance whether it's early stage companies or those that have grown to become SMEs that really require equity investment in order to acquire assets that they can pledge later on as collateral to banks for accessing credit. So in the case of DRC particularly, we don't have those type of players, in the market. And one of the main reasons is that we don't have a legal and regulatory, framework that would allow for such, players to establish a local presence. And through other donor programs, we are supporting actually the central bank and the Ministry of Finance in designing a regulatory framework and a legal framework that would allow this to happen here, because it's something that's dearly missing in the ecosystem.
And Snowy, you have a unique breadth of business experience in Africa. I mean, as you hear these challenges, are there any strategies that you think would be particularly effective in these kind of difficult, fragile, and vulnerable countries? Strategies to promote private sector investment.
Jules spoke about regulation. So the first strategy for us is better policy and regulation. So there's a need for governments to establish clear, consistent, and transparent policies that provide long-term stability and predictability for investors, and also the implementation of regulations that facilitate private sector participation and protect investment. So the second one, I think also Deep spoke about, that is better financing, blended finance, guarantees and insurance, climate finance, and so on. But for us, the most important thing is capacity building, Colin. We believe there are things that government and partners globally can do, including providing technical assistance and capacity building programs for local businesses and government to develop their skills and knowledge necessary for the sector. Also, I think this is the other strategy could be support for innovation and technology. We need to encourage innovation through research and development to create new technologies and business models, particularly those that are tailored for low-income markets. For example, affordable solar home systems and smart metering. The other one is social and community engagement. This is very important because energy firms should be able to engage communities to ensure that projects meet the needs of local communities, and also to gain the support from the communities. This might also include developing community-based energy solutions where stakeholders have a stake in the project, ensuring long-term sustainability and acceptability.
Thanks, Snowy. So, Jules, you've been particularly focusing on DRC, and I'm wondering if you have some strategies for how we can promote private sector investment that focuses at low-income people.
In terms of strategy, it's really about looking at, number one, the sectors that really have the highest impact potential, on those people. And if we look at the different markets that ARIA cover, most of those sectors are going to be agri-food, SMEs, energy is very critical, as well, because there is this notion of energy poverty, right? So to make sure that we can industrialize most of those nations, access to energy is very critical. And for the people that are especially in remote, areas and low-income people, they are paying a lot of money to get access to be able to access, fossil energy and so on. So it's a sizable part of their budget, and if they can get access to clean energy, they can save effectively more money that they can invest in education, for their kids, in better healthcare and so on. And I think that the DFIs that are part of ARIA are already focusing on those sectors. And then the other constraint that we have touched based upon here is the ticket size and collaboration with financial institutions that can do lower tickets is definitely the way to go.
Thanks, Jules. So, Snowy, let's talk about this idea of partnerships. I mean, and why are partnerships particularly important in these types of markets? And especially, what kind of partnerships should DFIs like BII concentrate on?
Yes, Colin, partnerships are very critical and important. For us in the sector, partnership with government is the #1 priority. Partnership with energy developers and providers of finance are critical to enable access to energy, especially in these economies. So DFIs need to ensure that partnership with communities, with small businesses, and also with some of the small funders that are existing in those countries is critical, because in establishing those, you are actually creating a value chain of bringing everyone that is important to be able to achieve the mandate that has been given to whether a DFI or an organization like Gridworks going forward. So partnership in the financial structuring is also important, because as Jules mentioned, sometimes it's actually very difficult to find the project that would be investable and be able to attract partners that will come in to contribute to ensuring that the project actually happens on the ground.
So, Deep, what kind of partnerships do you see that have been particularly effective in Nepal?
Thank you, Colin, again. IAN in itself is a unique example of a great partnership between DFIs. I mean, prior to this, I think it wasn't thought about whether two development financial institutions could come together and work together. And IAN's establishment with two, with the leadership of BII and the partnership of FMO and SDC, has set up a platform in Nepal that has brought together 20 DFIs to get interested in investment in Nepal. So that partnership has been absolutely fundamental to the success. And what that collectivism does sometimes is it gives you the traction that a single investor or a single entity cannot provide. That collectivism led to the signing of MOU between the government of Nepal and DFIs collectively together, committing to each other that, and building a partnership. That led to reforms recently, just recently in Nepal. That was the government of Nepal's response to that. And it has then resulted in a bigger volume of investments. So partnership at that level, sometimes even when you think of entities that are not designed to partner, when they come together, can yield much larger results than individually they would have.
And Jules, any final thoughts on partnership?
Yeah, so partnerships are really critical to everything that we do in ARIA. ARIA itself is a partnership of close to 20 DFIs, and the way that ARIA operates in those markets that we cover, we really go through partners, and I can name a few examples. We in Ethiopia, for example, are working very closely with the FCDO Manufacturing Africa, program that is providing TA to companies involved in manufacturing, agri-food, import substitution. In Sierra Leone, we're doing the same thing with the FCDO InvestSalon program, which is also providing TA to companies that are involved in many sectors, agriculture, forestry, manufacturing, and so on. And then in the case of the DRC, ARIA is working hands in hand with the USAID Investment Facilitation platform, whereby the USAID Investment Facilitation platform is providing let's say, sell-side transaction advisory support to companies that want to raise funding, and ARIA is providing buy-side investment, facilitation to basically get those companies into the pipeline of DFIs. So it's really wonderful to see donors and DFIs coming together and working hands in hands to promote investments in Africa.
And Snowy, if you polish your kind of crystal ball, what do you see in the future?
I see a collaboration of DFIs and all other funders working with governments. As I said, governments in Africa are more and more opening up to private sector participation. So I see all of those partners and stakeholders working together to ensure that we reduce energy poverty, that we make energy reliable and accessible and affordable, particularly to those rural communities. I see an Africa that is brightening up, and I see the development impact increasing in terms of improving the quality of life of people, creating jobs, making sure that food security exists, and that, we're seeing an Africa that is growing economically.
Thanks for that inspiration. Deep, what innovations do you want to predict?
I mean, innovation, there are many innovations that can actually benefit Nepal. What is very heartwarming is that the environment is changing. The opportunity for attracting foreign investments is real, is what the realization of the government, financial institutions, and even businesses is coming through. And so, with all of these rates so high, with the global context, the flow in of these investments, show of times, that are going to be better in the future when these rates are down, and it becomes a little bit more affordable. I think it's also a question of affordability for the market. Can the market provide the kind of returns that the capital demands? And sometimes, there are situations where the cost of capital becomes the paramount reason why investment becomes challenging. And for development financial institutions, I think there is an opportunity to, bring in blended solutions for particular sectors, targeted investment opportunities, and innovation around instruments, innovation around local currency financing will benefit a country like Nepal dramatically.
So Jules, Deep, and Snowy, on behalf of our viewers this morning, thank you very much for sharing your time and your experience.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you to our panelists. Now I'll hand you over to Maria Smith, BII's Chief Impact Officer, who's chairing the next panel, Impact on the Planet, Partnerships to Support Climate Innovation. And remember, Nick and Diana will be taking your questions, so please use the Q&A to submit your questions. Before we go to Maria, here's a short film reflecting on BII's impact on the planet in 2023.
We power more than 2.5 million electric kilometers daily through our network and our batteries, and that has so far led to offset of more than 50,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide.
The UK is committed to helping Indonesia pursue its energy transition ambitions. The flagship initiative for this is the $21 billion Just Energy Transition Partnership. And BII's $15 million investment into the Susi Energy Transition Fund supports the JETP and will help deliver green infrastructure projects across Southeast Asia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maria Smith, and I'm the Chief Impact Officer at British International Investment. I'm absolutely thrilled to be chairing this panel today, Impact on the Planet, Partnerships to Support Climate Innovations. Now, 4 years ago, we launched our climate strategy at BII, and since then, the climate emergency has only intensified. And the people in our regions where we invest are bearing the true brunt of these impacts. There's a clear link between climate change and development, but we can't achieve our mandate without addressing this critical challenge. And we also recognize that we can't do this alone. Building strong partnerships and supporting innovation in our markets is key. And whether it's backing entrepreneurs with tech-led solutions or creating platforms for climate innovation, collaboration is essential. And that's why today we're joined by 3 of our partners who we've worked with over the past year very closely. And they're going to share the challenges that they face on the ground and provide insights into the innovative approaches that they're using to unlock real solutions. Our first speaker is Samir Ibrahim, CEO and co-founder of SunCulture. Now, SunCulture is helping transform agriculture in Africa by providing solar-powered irrigation solutions to smallholder farmers. So this is enhancing food security, but it's also enhancing sustainability. And their innovative approach has empowered countless farmers, transforming lives and communities across the entire continent. We invested in the company last year, and we're helping smallholder farmers with this technology. Next, we have Yida Kamoli, the Managing Director for Africa at New Forests. And Yida brings over 2 decades of experience in sustainable investment, focusing on nature-based solutions and sustainable forestry. New Forest strategy in Africa aims to deliver impactful investments while promoting conservation and community development. We've partnered with New Forest and Africa Forestry Impact Platform, or AFIB, and we'll go on to discuss this in much more detail in this session. And finally, we have Quinton Vaquette, a founding partner at Wavemaker Impact. This is a pioneering climate tech venture builder based in Southeast Asia. Quinton and his team are dedicated to creating scalable solutions that are addressing environmental challenges. His work at Wavemaker Impact focuses on leveraging technology and innovation to drive sustainable development and positive change. We also invested in Wavemaker's fund last year to help invest in these early stage climate solutions in the region, which is relatively new for BII. So I'm going to go on to ask questions to the panel. Samir, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay. SunCulture is working with smallholder farmers in East Africa. Can you just tell us more about the business? What's the need that the business is trying to address? And how are you going about addressing that?
Thanks, Maria, for having me and for all the support. So the problems we're solving are monumental, and there's a few problems. First is, we all know that climate change is making it harder to grow food. Yet at the same time, we need to grow more food to feed a growing population. We've all seen the population charts, and we know where it's going in the next few decades. But if we continue to do so in the same way, we're going to run into problems because agriculture contributes to 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. So we need to figure out how to solve all 3 of these problems, because if we don't, we're going to run into more food challenges, we're going to run into more political instability, and we're unfortunately going to have to support many more people who are forced to migrate due to climate change. The easy solution would have been to deploy a bunch of irrigation across a bunch of markets. It's an old technology, quite unsexy. It can increase yields by up to 5 times. It's worked before. But remember, the third problem is that agriculture contributes to a third of global greenhouse gas emissions, and a big majority of that comes from water pumps for farming. So what we do is we figure out how to decarbonize irrigation with solar. The challenge with that, again, is that most smallholder farmers can't afford the upfront cost of solar irrigation, let alone regular irrigation. That's why of the 700 million people living in smallholder farmers in Africa, only 4% irrigate. So what we do is we use financial services and carbon revenues to make the cost of solar irrigation 50% cheaper than diesel and petrol pumps. We sell, we install, and we service these systems with our in-house sales agents and engineers. And then we allow farmers to buy other products and services that help them become more resilient to climate change through a marketplace. We've become the largest smallholder solar irrigation company across Africa. We work both in East and West Africa, and the impact is incredible. We have nearly 100% of our customers reporting improving their quality of life. The women of the household are saving 17 hours a week that they previously spent physically moving water. And this is physically moving 20-liter cans of water, which weighs 20 kg. So it's like the big weight plates in the gym. The woman of the household will wake up every morning, spending 2 or 3 hours physically moving water, first to meet her domestic needs and then meet her agriculture needs. We're seeing that 95% of our customers are accessing a solar water pump for the first time. We're seeing that almost half of our customers are getting access to credit for the first time from us. We're not even a bank. So we're seeing impacts across financing, across access to irrigation and solar services, across food impacts, across time savings, and it's a remarkable thing for us to see.
It really is. So when you're trying to measure the impact that you're having, are you looking across all of these? You're looking at the livelihoods, you're looking at the financial inclusion, and you're looking at the sustainability aspect of it?
Yeah, you have to. I think, impact is complex and it's nuanced. And I think you have to think about what are the second and third layer of impacts. Other than, for us, it's increased income, increased food. But then there's all these other layers when it comes to health and education that we need to pay attention to because they are really important.
Great. Quinton, can I come on to you now? You're a founding partner at Wavemaker. This is a pioneering climate tech venture builder in Southeast Asia. Can you start with what the company is setting out to achieve and then link to which are the first investments that you've made to try to realize that?
Yeah, thanks, Maria. So I guess the problem we're trying to tackle is that climate change is still very much considered as an engineering problem, whereas actually a large and significant chunk of it is a human problem. It's a behavioral problem. And so, we found that half of emissions can be globally avoided or reduced using tech that exists. And, like Samir is explaining, this is tech that exists, that is great, that works. But it requires business model innovation in order to be adopted by the users and the customers that could use it. And so as we kind of discovered that we call it the easy to abate emissions, which are still hard, but for which there's tech. And so it means that what we're essentially doing is we're building ventures that go after these business model innovation opportunities, that go after solving some of these problems where tech is not the challenge, but the challenge is increasing adoption. And so what's interesting is as we sort of started playing out that model, what we realized is that the biggest company that we think can be building climate and that is reasonable to operate within a certain segment, a certain geography, is 100 megatons, 100 million tons of CO2 reduction, CO2 or methane and so on. And so what we kind of came up with is that we can build what we call 100 by 100 companies, which are companies that have the potential to generate more than $100 million in high margin revenue, be a unicorn, and at the same time have the potential to abate 100 MT. And so if you kind of apply the same principles that you would apply in VC, in unit economics, market size, and so on, both on the carbon and on the dollar side, then suddenly you get an interesting way of thinking around impact as well as dollars and as a result, scalable companies. So I mean, we're new. We've been around for just a couple of years. BII backed us on our first fund, and what we hope to do really is over the next 1 and 2 decades build a portfolio of company that could abate 10% of global emissions using this model. And so we'll see whether we get there, of course. But
well,
so
we certainly like that ambition.
yeah, lots of reasons and lots of problems along the way, but we'll try at least. And so I guess hence the question of partnership, right? Because this is something for which you need a lot of people. So the interesting question is that we saw the reason why we are venture builder rather than an investment fund is that we saw a lot of great entrepreneurs building commercial companies in e-commerce and marketplaces and all these places where you can make lots of money. But we didn't see enough of these great entrepreneurs tackling some of these other issues where we also see that you can make a lot of money, but you also solve climate problems. And that's why essentially what we do is we go after these entrepreneurs who've got 1 or 2 or 3 exits behind them. Typically, they've got children now and they say, my next company needs to be something that means something. And but they're like, I'm not a climate scientist. I don't know how to think about climate. And so that's why essentially we then give these entrepreneurs a team of 3 people for 6 months, and with a process we then get to a business that we can start. So one of the examples that I think is really cool is a company called Rise, which is a company that we launched about a year and a half ago. And so the company is going after the emissions of rice cultivation. So interestingly, rice, the rice that we eat, right, emits about 1 gigaton worth of emissions globally in the form of methane. And so if you put that in perspective, that's about the size of aviation globally. And so there's so much money going into aviation, so many entrepreneurs going into aviation, but nobody's looking at this rice problem. So what's even more interesting is that the technology to reduce the emissions in rice is about 100-year-old, and it's effectively just draining the paddy, the paddy that's flooded in which the rice grows, just drain it twice in the season, roughly. And what happens is that the sun exposes the bacteria die, and as a result, they don't produce methane anymore. So the solution is so simple, but the behavior change is hard, because suddenly you need to get 300 million rice farmers, who are some of the poorest in the world, to do something that they've been doing for generations differently. And so I think quite similar actually to what Samir was sharing, is that Rise is essentially a fintech that found what the biggest problem is for rice farmers, which is input financing. Typical rice farmer will pay about 20 to 30% on their inputs that they borrow from the local input shop, which is fertilizer and seeds and so on. And then hopefully they get a right season, and then hopefully they can pay back. If not, they're in debt for the next 5 years. And so essentially we created a company that goes after improving the efficiency of those farmers, financing their inputs, and is effectively able to increase their economic situation by 20 to 30%, which is a mix of yield, lower financing costs, and better inputs. And so I think what's been really cool is that this company, which is business model innovation and so on, we've been able, again, in the context of partnerships, to build this together with some really big partners like Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is Bill Gates' fund, and Temasek and Gen Zero here in the region, and that has really given the company the ability to grow really fast, start in 2 countries at the same time, and hopefully have a lot of impact in the coming years.
No, thank you. That's a really good, tangible example to bring the opportunity to life. So the opportunity is clear. Can we maybe just spend a moment talking about the challenges that are, I think, especially unique to the region that you operate in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, so Southeast Asia is, I think what's interesting is that it's a place where, I guess, a couple of things. So one, there's a huge gap between where climate VC capital has gone and where the emissions are. To give you an idea, there are over 300 electric vehicle companies of any shape or form: 2-wheelers, 4-wheelers, 6-wheelers, 5-wheelers. So about 60% of all VC money goes into mobility, whereas it's only 12% of the problem. So who's looking after the ag problems, the land use problems, the industry problems, and so on? So that's the first gap. The second interesting question is that about 50% of all emissions in the region, 50%, are either agriculture and food or deforestation, and so which kind of usually links to agriculture and food. And so it means that, different from some other regions, this is essentially a ag heavy and land use heavy region. So the businesses you want to build to do something about these emissions are in this space. So that's why a lot of our portfolio also focuses there. And then I think that the last thing that I found really interesting is that I often hear like, oh, but these regions don't have the Southeast Asia doesn't have the right regulations in play to help the incentives and support and so on. And that's true, but actually Southeast Asia has a lot of inefficiencies. And so when you operate in a large segment with hundreds of millions of people who operate in a very decentralized fashion, there are lots of inefficiencies in that. And what's interesting about inefficiencies is that you can solve them. And when you solve them, you essentially create value. As a result, you can create a driver. So what I was explaining about rice is that the fact that rice farmers have to pay 30% for 3 months of financing doesn't make sense. So if you can solve that in a different way, then you can create value for them, and as a result, create an incentive to change behavior in an economic way, right? Not in a sort of philanthropic or what I often hear like educational way. You consider them as customers, and you create value for them, and then and that's how you can change behavior.
Oh, thank you. That's really valuable insight. Ida, let's talk about African Forestry Impact Platform. This is which New Forest set up with BII and some other DFIs. Can you just again tell us a little bit about the need for AFIP and why the company was set up?
Yeah, cool. So I hope you can hear me clearly. So firstly, we're very simply a plantation forestry investor. Yeah. And as a point of uniqueness, we are an evergreen fund. And this is something that's been debated in Africa for many years in the whole private equity sector. And I think we're one of the pioneers in this. Now, why was this necessary? At the end of the day, forestry is a long-term asset class. The average tree will grow from between 7 to 25 years in maturity. So therefore, you definitely need a group of investors who can hold this asset class for a significant period of time. Now, what had been happening across Africa and virtually every African country that has had plantation assets being planted with a mixture of private sector and public sector funding. And if you look very carefully, there's always been somewhat of a dearth of enough funding to plant these forests. But more importantly, in some cases, you could see there was a risk of them becoming stranded assets. And I've also mentioned this very long holding period. So you've got to find the right investors who can commit for that time. So one of the most important roles I think that we will play is really safeguarding these assets, because more than any other type of asset, if you've got a 10,000, 20,000 hectare forest and you don't look after it, you actually could have a potential disaster here. And that's really what we need to think about. And there are all the risks going on. One of the biggest risks we're worried about now is fire protection. And we all watch all the things that are happening around the world. That's also happening in our region in Africa. So we have to have very active fire protection mechanisms. Across Africa, there's always a risk of encroachment. That's farmers coming into the forest to use the land for farming. And of course, you then lose the trees. But also, charcoal and firewood is one of the primary sources of energy. And there's various statistics where people talk about 50, 60, 70, 80%, largely for cooking. So if you live in Africa, you will definitely have seen very many and very sad examples of deforestation taking place. So acquiring these assets and looking after them and safeguarding is, for us, one of our primary ways in which we look at this. But then over and above that, you then look at sustainability. And one of the important ways of ensuring they're not being encroached on is how do you create a good commercial story around this? And so we look at our investments across the value chain. Again, one of the most interesting statistics is Africa imports as finished wood products. So that's furniture, fittings for houses, twice the value of its exports of logs. So there's that huge value addition that can actually attract revenue back into country. But much more importantly, if you sit with a carpenter in quite a few countries, they're struggling to get access to good quality wood. So therefore, you've lost the opportunity for even the artisanal sector to grow and develop in its own right. Now, the final bit is, and maybe it seems like a small thing, but actually part of being an active investor, part of being an interested investor, we've also seen a lot of brain drain in terms of people leaving, particularly the whole primary ag sector in general, and forestry also, is facing that. So it's a good signaling effect to the people who are building their careers today that there is an opportunity in forestry. Of course, we need it, and of course, there's opportunities to grow. And this cannot be underestimated. If you look across most of agriculture in Africa, if I broaden it beyond forestry, you will see this very worrying brain drain, which brings itself out in a lot of projects being very challenged when you try and manage them out. And then finally, we'll see how things develop in the coming years. But I mentioned this public sector and private sector assets. On the private sector side, of course, easier to transact. But what we expect to see is that a lot of these assets, which the governments across Africa borrowed to invest in from the likes of the World Bank, this is probably an opportunity and a moment for them to relieve their balance sheets and commercialize these assets. And we're hoping to see that happen, as well as also the opportunity to even improve the quality of the management of those assets. So that's really roughly the opportunity that we're driving today.
And what would you say is unique about New Forest's approach to this? And how are you looking at this differentiated?
Severalfold. Well, one, I mentioned we're an evergreen fund, which means we've got a long-term view. And long-term here means, as I said, a tree is anywhere from 7 to 25 or 27 years. Now, it's a very unique investor who can take a view like that. And much more importantly, particularly when you're planting new forests, you're cash flow negative for the better part of 7 to 10 years. So that is a point of uniqueness we have. Now, how are we able to look at that? For, as you mentioned, we have BII as an investor who is able to take a long-term view together with other DFIs. That's the useful part of our story. We are part of New Forests, and New Forest is the second biggest timberland manager around the world. That's extremely important because it does mean that if you're asking people to take that kind of a view, you better have experts to be able to sell, to produce a convincing story, and most importantly, to execute on that. So that, I think those two parts are quite critical. And then thirdly, there is the impact for us in sustainability is important also because when you're managing assets like land, which are emotive, you really do have to have a commitment to how you work with communities. For us, and I'll give an example, fire protection for us is the communities get involved, and they're the ones who alarm and say, we can see a fire being set. They also will change behaviors in terms of how they manage their own farms to avoid fire risk engulfing the whole area. So sustainability really does become a very, it's a core business need as much as it is the right thing to do as a business.
Great, thank you. And I just want to focus on this theme of partnership, because everybody has mentioned, including me in the intro, the importance of partnerships in achieving these critical objectives. Maybe just to get a little bit more specific, Samir, can I ask you, how have you seen partnerships useful in addressing these climate challenges in your space?
Everything's about partnerships. I'll give you sort of a live example. So we're working on a way to deploy enough solar irrigation across Kenya to get the country to become on a pathway to being 100% food secure from a production standpoint. So huge, never happened before, first of its kind. It'll cost $244 million to do that. So relatively little bit amount of money to solve the problem. And it's a mixture of equity, debt, carbon financing, and results-based financing, or subsidy, but rebranded as RBF. And I'll talk about rebranding in a second. We need innovative financing mechanisms to figure out how to finance this. So for example, we have this really cool partnership with BII, or we have a carbon facility that is structured in a way that no carbon facility has ever been structured in the world. And like Ida said, you need investors who can think innovatively and take early stage financing risks on new products to be able to move a sector forward. So if you look at how film financing was transformed with CAA a few decades ago, if you look for the debt for nature swaps that have been happening around the world, you need folks who are taking financial products and moving them and changing them based off of the need. But I think the most interesting thing is we need partnerships to help spread the message that while there is a requirement for innovative financing, from a first principles perspective, we just need to do the same thing we've done in other sectors. So what I find really funny is if you look at any commercial construction project in the world, you have an equity slice, you have a debt slice, and you have a subsidy slice. That's all used for feasibility. When you look at every grid in the world, it's between 75 and 100% subsidized. If you look at agriculture and energy in the developed world, all subsidized. In the UK, you get your bicycle subsidized from a cycle to work scheme. Yet in the markets that we work in, because governments don't have access to capital, and I was on the board of the Kenya Revenue Authority previously for a year, so I've seen what happens in the inside. Because there's no capital, we have to go out and raise philanthropic capital to replace government subsidies in other parts of the world. But when we talk about philanthropy, everyone says, oh, no, this isn't commercial. We don't want to ruin the market. We don't want to change market dynamics with subsidies, when it's actually the same exact thing that's been used to make this iPhone, to make the computer that I'm on. BYD has been subsidized by the Chinese government by $29 billion. So I think what becomes interesting from a partnership perspective is we lean on our partners to give credibility to, hey, when we talk about blended capital, it's like an old existing thing that every developed market has been founded on. We're just using different language because that's the language of the money that we're receiving. But when we think about blended capital, it's really not a new thing. So we lean on our partners to go out and say, look, this is really a normal thing. We've done this for this construction project and this housing project. We're just doing it for distributed infrastructure right now. It's just a normal infrastructure project that is taken a bit of time to figure out because no one's done it before, but now we can come in with really traditional capital. But I find the semantics of it and the requirement to use a specific amount of semantics to be quite interesting and quite funny at times, but our partners do a really good job of helping us create these financial products that fit within the categories that are almost acceptable from a commercial standpoint. So, when we're talking about a large carbon facility, we've had an amazing experience with the folks at BII helping us figure out how do we structure this so it becomes palatable for more commercial capital to come in. So how do we make everyone realize this is the same type of product they're used to funding, just using the language that works in the way that we do. And I find this very nuanced way of approaching partnership to be actually one of the most value add that we've seen.
And Quintin, I want to give you a chance. Do you have any comments on, I think, specifically the role that DFIs, play in Southeast Asia and in climate tech?
Yeah, thanks, Maria. So, it's I fully ascribe to the idea of partnerships and the importance, right? Like, there is no way we can do anything in the objectives that I mentioned earlier without partnerships with founders, with co-investors, with and with LPs. When we went to market with our first funds, it was a bit weird, right? We went to market with a strange strategy of venture building in a strange region, Southeast Asia, going after climate, very focused with first-time GPs. And so, this is not an easy sell, right? So it wasn't necessarily easy to get people with us. And I think we've had overwhelming support from BII and some of the other DFIs. And that has really made a difference. So this has now given us a shot at kind of trying to do what we think we can do, and then hopefully within the next 1 and 2 years, we can put some of that to fruition and then as a result move to a second fund and so on. So I think the role here was very, very clear, and we're super grateful for the support.
Good. That is certainly what we're trying to do, is help de-risk and catalyze markets for future investors. Okay, we have 3 minutes left, and so I'm going to do a rapid fire last question. If everyone can keep it to around a minute, but I think it'll be an interesting question for the audience, which is, looking forward, what other innovations do you think will help shape future investments in the emerging markets? Yida, I'm going to come to you just because you were the last to speak, if that's okay.
Yeah, look, I think for me, the key focus, what we're seeing in Africa, outside of South Africa, is the insurance and pension companies are starting to realize they need to manage their investments a lot more actively and look for more alpha. So I think where I would be focusing now is keeping an eye on that and saying, I'm building a business for these domestic insurance companies and pension funds to invest in. So what does that business need to look like to be investable? What do the capital structures need to look like? And then how do I use DFI money where I can as the venture capital bridge into that space?
Quentin, you're next in my line of view.
Yeah, so look, I think what we will see is many more business models in the climate space. I think so far we've always taken climate as an engineering problem and more technology, hard to abate sectors and so on. It's very needed, but I think there's a coming to realizing that actually a lot of the tech is already there. We need more adoption, more distribution, more business models that make this possible, and so I think we'll see a lot of really exciting companies popping up like this.
Good. Hope so.
It's
Samir. Yes.
I actually have a view that I fully believe in innovation, and I fully believe we need innovation to move us forward as humanity. I also think that we can solve most of our problems with existing innovation right now. Just we need to repurpose them from one area to the other. I've seen a lot of success in various markets and in various sectors figuring out how to use the combination of carbon financing and results-based financing to make climate tech affordable to the masses. And I think that if we can get people to cut bigger checks and take bigger bets in single sectors and in single problems, we can start moving the needle. So I see the combination of those and the sort of moving from a spray and pray approach to a more focused approach of funding. I think those two combinations could really move us forward.
Okay, well, we'll be watching this space. Thank you for your time today, and more importantly, thank you for your very hard work trying to address these critical development needs. We're certainly grateful for each of your partnerships.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you to both our panels. Hopefully, those thoughtful insights gave you a sense of why we're so excited about the partners we work with. We've now reached the time for the Q&A with our CEO and Chair. Thank you to everyone online who has been submitting questions. We have had a lot come through, so I might merge some questions into broader themes. Where I can, if you've provided your name and organization, I'll attribute the question. Diana and Nick's presentations have prompted some excellent questions, and as usual, they reflect the diversity and depth of our work. So let's get started. Welcome back, Nick and Diana. We've had quite a few questions through about our plans for mobilization. Samuel Gebrselassie of LEC Consulting, Tom Adlam at AgriFrontier, and Hugo Cox at Asian Investor all ask how we catalyze investments and partner with other investors. Mark Jackson at Michelle Dines & Co. also asks what can be done to get larger global investors off the sidelines to invest in large climate projects. Diana, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. So I think this is an incredibly important question, and it's a critical area of focus for us. It goes without saying that if we can take $1 of BII investment and multiply that to be $6 of total investment, we'll have a transformational impact on what we can do in these markets. I think there are some areas of mobilization, bringing in other DFIs, giving other investors assurance around impact, making them feel confident in that, pooling resources, for example, in the context of ARIA that you heard about on the panel, or creating an initial platform that can then become investable over time, like Ayana Solar, are great examples of where we're already making significant progress. But it's the mobilization, as you say, of other capital at scale that I think is a new and important area of focus for us. That is more likely to be in the infrastructure area and in areas of climate finance than it is, for example, in small-scale development projects in frontier markets. Part of the reason for that is that the ticket size and the scale of available investment, and part of it is the risk profile. But it is an area that we're giving really significant thought to, and we're thinking about how we structure projects differently in that context, how we structure portfolios, and how we create a climate together with those investors like pension funds and insurance companies that we can really mobilize that additional institutional capital. Nick, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, look, I think Diana really covered the key points. And I suppose, you know, from my perspective, I would add, I think, when we talk about a mobilization of capital, very often the discussion within the development finance communities around blended finance, and clearly, and that, so basically giving some form of risk mitigation to attract these large investors, and that remains and will be a very important part of how we mobilize large-scale capital. But I think it does go, when we think about mobilization, it goes further than that. You know, we think about ways, for example, that we can recycle our own existing portfolio. We think about ways how we can help our existing fund managers raise money more easily. We even think about ways where we could potentially leverage our own balance sheet. So lots of different ways we can do it. I agree with Diana that the issue, the large numbers are definitely in climate, and that's where you have this massive appetite for capital, a large part of it in emerging markets, a large part of it in the places where we invest in. So we've got to be very focused on that. And then I think finally I'd say we also got to remember that often, I'm going to use Vietnam offshore wind as an example here. I mean, it's often the case that we need to do some preparatory work before we get to the stage of actually having to mobilize the capital. So for Vietnam offshore wind, you need seabed mapping. We don't have that. So I think as we think about how we use our scarce concessionary capital and grant capital, we should be focusing in on that whole enabling environment to make sure we can accelerate as much as possible the deployment of large-scale capital.
Thank you both for that. We'll change topics a little bit. Hester LaRue at CARE International UK asks how BII is strengthening women's economic empowerment and whether we've learned any lessons through our gender lens investing. Nick, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, well, I think, as I said in my remarks earlier, enabling greater women's economic empowerment is fundamental. Is a fundamental theme that goes across all our investments. I think we try to do it really at two stages. I mean, when we're looking at any new investments, and we look at probably hundreds of new investments every year, there's a whole process around diagnostics that we go through to really understand how the company's leadership, the company's employee base, the company's policies, to ensure that they're consistent with the type of with what we would consider good practice. And then once we've made an investment with the companies we decide to invest in, then there's a whole implementation process, and we have a plan for every an environmental and social plan, action plan for every company we invest in. That always includes a plan around gender. We deliver throughout the life cycle of our investment a whole range of additional training, both to the companies that we invest into, the intermediaries that we use. So it's really it's a sort of a cradle to grave approach to addressing this issue.
I'll follow up with another one for you, Nick, which is we've had several questions about our approach to financing SMEs. Derek Sanyumbi and Vincent Tattersall from 1888 Capital ask, how do we plan to address the SME financing gap?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. You know, we just came back from Pakistan, and one of the things we learned in Pakistan was that only 17% of banks' loan book is going, or it formerly used to be 17% of loan book. Now it's down to somewhere in the single digits. So clearly there's a gap here where local financial institutions are not really funding SMEs. And as we know, SMEs are the lifeblood of the economy. They're the foundation of most jobs in many of the countries that we invest in. So what do we need to do? I think we need more ways of funding in local currency, because that's too much of what development finance institutions provide historically has been dollars. That's typically not what SMEs need. I think we need to be much more flexible on how we do it in terms of terms. I mean, banks tend to have very rigid conditions around, security and repayment and those sort of things. So I think we need to try to be more flexible. I think we need to invest more in non-bank lenders, because, as I say, I think we can help through directing credit in the banks. We can help and encourage the banks to do more to reach this segment. But there's also an increasing role for non-bank lenders. We've seen that particularly vividly in India. A lot of fintech organizations that are using technology and using data to make smaller loans, and we can invest in those companies, give them more capital to grow. So I think there's a whole range of different things. We mentioned before Growth Investment Partners in Ghana, which was our attempt to we said the best way to address this issue is start our own company and fund it ourselves, and then develop this higher risk, more flexible lending model, and that's what we're doing. And then we think, as I said, we expect to be attracting additional funding from other DFIs, from local Ghanaian investment funds. But I do think it's a really critical role for DFIs.
Super, thanks for that. We'll change topic entirely now and come back to you, Diana. We've had questions, given that this is Nick's last annual review event, and as the CEO of BII, are you ready to give some updates on the search for his replacement?
So I think the first thing to say is this has actually been an incredibly uplifting process to go through the CEO search. We've had a really exciting range of candidates, really immensely talented people from a diverse range of backgrounds. So I'm very happy with the pool of candidates we've had to choose from. As you can imagine, and as I hope you would expect, we've tried to ensure a sort of scrupulously equitable and disciplined process, and to make sure that that is rigorous in our assessment. I'm delighted to say that I hope we will be in a position to make an announcement in the near future. So please stay posted on this.
Okay. Perhaps preemptive, but Nick, we've had a follow-up question for you, which is what do you think the next CEO should do better? Do you have any tips?
Yeah, look, I will have lots of tips for my successor on that, and I'm sure that my colleagues will have even more tips when they talk to them. Many of them will probably relate to being in a sort of better mood in the morning, before breakfast. But it's, I think if I had to look at one area where I think, I mean, we've made progress, but there's really just a lot more to do. It comes back to this question you asked earlier about mobilization. I mean, I think we're all aware, particularly as we become this, assume this responsibility for climate finance in our markets. I mean, we recognize that we're not going to move the needle unless we can mobilize large amounts of commercial capital. As I said, we've made some progress on that, but I think that's where you really have to, whoever takes my seat will really have to sort of double down.
Okay, thank you. We'll go back now to some questions on our investment activities. So Mike Morris from the Department of Business and Trade in the UK is asking, what are BII's plans for sustainable energy generation and transmission in Africa? Nick, would you like to respond?
So 650 million people today live without power in Africa. And that means they obviously can't power their homes, but neither can they power factories or schools or hospitals. So it's a fundamental issue in development which needs to be addressed. What needs to happen today, unlike if we go back 10 or 20 years ago, is we need to address the issue through more sources of renewable energy. So that's obviously a huge finding more ways of doing, whether it's solar or wind or geothermal or hydro projects across Africa is important. And it's disappointing when you look at Africa how little is actually happening, despite all the rhetoric and all the effort and all the talk. I mean, I think only projects were actually reached financial close. Renewable energy projects reached financial close last year. So we really need to redouble our efforts. And the other area, and that was talked about when we did the earlier panel, Snowy talked about GridWorks. Transmission is absolutely fundamental. And this is not just true, by the way, in Africa. It's true around the world that we are developing sources of renewable energy and we are not figuring out ways to connect them to the grid. And that is a fundamental problem in Africa. It's accentuated by the fact that so many of the sort of state utility companies have significant debt issues. So I think that's a combination of more focus on actually getting projects done in a range of range of renewable energy, and also this real focus on transmission. Where, as I said, we're trying to play our role through GridWorks, but there's a huge amount to do.
Thank you for that. We'll zoom out a little bit and get back to sort of the heart of BII's mandate. Parisa Umar from Lightcastle Partners is asking how we balance the dual objectives of achieving financial returns and driving sustainable development impact. Diana, would you like to pick that up?
Well, I think, as you say, I mean, this really goes to the heart of what we do. And for more than 75 years, we've been trying to be thoughtful about balancing those two objectives. But I do want to be clear that it isn't a balance in the classic sense of the word. Our focus is absolutely on impact. And when we think about finance, we think about where we're additional and where we have impact. The return question is a secondary question, and the return we're looking for is not a commercial return. So as you know, the return that we're seeking is to clear 2% across the portfolio over a 7-year period. And that's a very, very different type of return seeking to others. The reason we seek a return at all is to enable us to preserve the capital base of BII, to enable us to invest and reinvest repeatedly to really have that impact and do good. So I think it's really important to see it in that context, but I think it's something that actually, if you look over the history of BII with some few years of regrettable exceptions, and I think certainly very consistently in recent years, we've succeeded in doing.
Okay, great. We have questions about our presence in our markets. We've had quite a few come in. Vincent Tattersall also is asking us which African countries we're looking to invest in where we haven't historically invested before. We've also had lots of specific questions come in from across multiple markets asking how to get in touch with BII and asking what more BII can do in these countries. These have come from Pakistan, Rwanda, Sri Lanka, Ghana. Nick, would you like to tell people how they can engage with us?
Well, let me start with the first part of the question around sort of broadly expansion in Africa. BII has got investments today in 34 different countries in Africa, so that's probably as broad a reach or broader than almost any other investment institution. And I think we have the ability to make investments in any countries. So I think it's less about sort of picking individual countries, and obviously it's somewhat circumstances change too. I mentioned in my remarks being in Tanzania. Tanzania was a country that quite honestly was difficult to invest in. If I go back 5 years or more when I started, is now under new political leadership with a more stable economy, is suddenly really attractive and sort of at the sweet spot for development finance. So we put a lot more. So it's not a static thing. It's a moving target. But I do think it's more about doing as much as broadening. It's about being more focused and doing more in the tougher countries. And we heard the discussion earlier about ARIA, which is an initiative we started really to, as one of the speakers put it, mutualize resources and address difficult countries like Sierra Leone and Liberia and so on. And I think that's really where we need to, rather than thinking about breadth, we need to think about depth, and particularly depth in those more difficult areas. In terms of, I know we had a number of questions from people about specifically various countries, and Rwanda and Pakistan and Sri Lanka and so on. And there, I mean, the best way to get in touch with BII obviously is if you know we have 12 offices around our investment geographies. If you know the people in those offices, then you should contact, they're the best point of contact. And if you don't, you can always send, I know it sounds a bit sort of dull, but you can always send an email to inquiries@bii.co.uk. That address is monitored every day, and somebody, I promise you, somebody will get back to you if you do.
Okay, great. We've got quite a specific question from Danny Smith at WWF, who is interested in understanding how BII considers nature and biodiversity in its current strategy, and how this might develop in the future. Diana, would you like to pick that up?
So I think it's a great question. We don't specifically invest in sort of pure nature or biodiversity projects, but it is absolutely integral to how we think about all our projects, and very particularly our infrastructure projects. So I think I was talking earlier about Zephyr Power. I think that's a great example of somewhere where, you know, the sort of primary focus of the project is essentially generating wind power. But that area had seen really significant sort of, frankly, desolation and a change in its ecosystem. And it was incredibly important to reintroduce biodiversity into that environment. And so, as well as the windmills, there is now a very big plantation program around mangroves. And I was able to see the change in biodiversity that was happening. So there were real crabs, there were real lungfish, and we were able to hear from the local fishing communities about the positive impacts that had for them. It was also very interesting to see that in contrast to some other wind projects on adjacent land where no attempt had been made to do this, and it really was night and day. So I think any large infrastructure project that we look at, we're always looking at community and the environment and biodiversity there. So it's critically important, and will continue to be.
Okay, thank you for that. With an eye on the time, I might start wrapping up this session. We had a really interesting question from Simone Dunn, who asks, the development sector is always changing. How might the investment approach change over the next decade or two? One assumes an ever-increasing focus on climate-related work, but what else might change? And I might ask you both to respond to that, starting with Nick.
Yeah, so we're talking 10, 20 years. I think this question is absolutely right. The climate is going to be a dominant theme. I think you will get much greater segmentation in terms of countries, particularly middle-income countries, particularly in our case, many of the countries in Asia. I think our role will be very focused around climate, because I think we have a huge responsibility in the developed countries to help with the support the transition to net zero in those countries, and that's a huge task. I think the rest of our work will get increasingly focused on the lower income countries, and many of the viewers will have seen that in the white paper, for example, we committed to having 50% of our investment go to lower income countries, and I think that's almost the non-climate part will be very focused on the lower income countries. And then I think finally this, and I mentioned this theme earlier on in the context of mobilization, I think that we know we can't solve these problems without large amounts of commercial capital. We know the development finance institutions are very well situated to really support that process. So I think that theme of looking not at what we're investing off our own balance sheet, but looking much more about what we're able to do in terms of bringing other people along with us will be a more and more important theme.
Anything to add to that?
No, I think that Nick summarized that well. I think the one thing to call out is it's getting harder, and it's intentionally getting harder. We're trying to raise the bar on ourselves. We want to have that focus on low-income countries, and the climate challenge globally is becoming more significant and more urgent. So those two areas of focus, I think, are absolutely the hard part, but they're absolutely where we want to focus.
Thank you. I think that was our final question. Thank you, Nick and Diana, for your candid responses. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you for all your questions, and I am sorry if we didn't manage to get around to everyone's. We do very much value your engagement during these sessions, and I know that many of you will keep the conversation going with us in the coming months, and we look forward to that. So that concludes our event today, but before we close, I'll hand you back to Diana for her final words.
Thank you, Huma. So let me leave you with just 3 things. First of all, I wanted to encourage you to read the annual review. I'm always struck when I go through the pages of our annual review by the sheer scope and the number of activities that we're involved in, and we don't have time to go through all of those today. I hope that you will be struck, as I am this year, by the volume of those activities, and I hope the difference that BII is making in the world. We've tried over the last couple of hours to give you a sense of that. Secondly, I wanted to thank our partners and investee companies who've joined us today and work with us every day. For me, it's meeting the people who run the companies that we invest in that really gives us the understanding for what we're doing. I hope the last couple of hours have given you a sense of that and why we're so excited about it. A sense of the extraordinary impact that these people and companies can have in their markets and the reason why development finance remains so important. Finally, a big thank you to all of you online. You're our partners. You've worked with us to generate that impact. And you've also scrutinized us and kept us on our toes. We're looking forward over the next year to continuing that engagement to increase our commitment even further to the development impact we can have across your markets. Thank you again for attending and have a good day.